Imagine for a moment that you are in 14th century France. The rooster crows, the mist settles over the rooftops, and in the kitchens, the fire is already crackling. It's breakfast time. In a city whose name history did not record, perhaps in Languedoc, perhaps in Provence, it is said that married women had a morning routine, a rather peculiar one. According to the legend that has reached us, every morning, these women added a very small, dose of a mild poison to their husband's breakfast. It wasn't to kill them. Not at all. It was something much more subtle. The man would leave for his labors, to the fields, the workshop, the war, not noticing anything strange. The day went on. But, like an invisible hourglass, a mechanism was set in motion inside his body. Because if the husband tarried too long, if he did not return home at the expected time, the symptoms appeared. Nausea. A piercing headache. A profound fatigue and sadness he could not explain. The farther away he was, the worse he felt. But here was the second part of the ritual. At nightfall, when the husband finally crossed the threshold, defeated by the malaise, his wife would receive him with tender concern. And she would offer him a comforting brew, the antidote. In minutes, the relief was miraculous. The man, grateful, attributed his recovery to the warmth of the home and the care of his wife. Unknowingly, his body and mind were learning a powerful lesson. Leaving home was synonymous with pain, returning, with salvation. A macabre practice? A domestic control strategy? Or simply a fascinating tale that has survived centuries? This is the story of one of the most curious legends of the Middle Ages. A story where the kitchen could be a laboratory, and conjugal love, a poison mystery. Join me in unraveling this mystery. Because to understand it, we have to delve into the best-kept secrets of medieval pharmacopeia. To make sense of this legend, we have to forget our modern pharmacy and immerse ourselves in the world of domestic medieval medicine. In a time without doctors around the corner, knowledge of plants was power, and that power resided, very often, in the hands of women. They were the pharmacists, the healers, the ones who knew the properties of every root, every flower, every fungus. They knew what could lower a fever, what could relieve pain, and what, in the exact dose, could produce very specific symptoms. What mild poison could they have used? Historians and toxicologists speculate with plants from the Solanaceae family, like Belladonna. In tiny and precise doses, its alkaloids can cause mental confusion, dry mouth, tachycardia, blurred vision, and a feeling of general malaise and depression. Perfect for simulating a sickness of absence. And the antidote, here lies the brilliance. It probably wasn't a chemical antivirus. It was another herbal preparation, a calmative, a mild sedative, an emollient for the stomach. Something that would counteract the symptoms or simply calm the man. The key was the timing and the psychological effect. It wasn't magic. It was applied psychology and pharmacology, centuries before those words existed. The man's body associated leaving equals pain, discomfort. Returning home and taking his wife's potion equals relief, safety, well-being. It was an almost perfect classical conditioning. But this leads us to an inevitable question: if it was so ingenious, could it have been real? Or are we facing a fantasy fueled by fear and superstition? To answer, we must leave that nameless city and travel to 17th century Italy, where a woman turned poison into a true work of art. Because although our legend is speculative, history shows us that slow, calculated poisonings were not just a product of the imagination. A century after the time of our legend, in the sophisticated Italian courts, the name Giulia Tofana whispered terror and fascination. This woman, an alleged noblewoman or astute entrepreneur, did not poison breakfasts. She refined the art to legendary levels. Tofana sold, or her network sold, the Aqua Tofana, a legendary poison, tasteless, odorless, and transparent. The most terrifying part, its effect was adjustable. Whoever administered it could calculate death for within a week, a month, even a year. It began with mild symptoms, weakness, languor, a vague malaise that no doctor could diagnose. It is said that more than 600 men, many of them abusive husbands or simply an obstacle to their wives' desires, died this way. The Aqua Tofana was the open secret of women trapped in marriages with no way out in a society that gave them no legal options. What does Tofana have to do with our French legend? Everything and nothing. It is not proof that the breakfast story happened, but it is irrefutable historical evidence that 1. Networks of women who shared knowledge about poisons existed. 2. Methods of slow and undetectable poisoning were devised. 3. The kitchen and the apothecary were realms of female power that, in extreme cases, could become weapons. The French legend is a non-lethal, massive version of a phenomenon that, in its criminal form, did exist. One speculates with control, the other, with definitive liberation. Both feed on the same historical substrate, the profound feminine knowledge of the hidden properties of nature. This leaves us in fascinating middle ground. The city of the poisoners probably never existed as such. But the idea that it existed, the fear or fascination it provoked, speaks to a historical reality more complex than what simple records tell us. And that fear, in the Middle Ages and beyond, had a name that made anyone who ventured into this forbidden knowledge tremble: witchcraft. Because playing with the boundaries between remedy and poison was an extremely dangerous path. And the consequences of being discovered were terrifying. Let's return to our hypothetical medieval city. Imagine the secret is discovered. That a husband becomes suspicious, or that a neighbor talks too much. At that instant, the woman who knew the herbs for her family's well-being ceased to be a respectable housewife. She became, in everyone's eyes, a witch. In the mentality of the time, there wasn't much difference between a healer and a sorceress. The same knowledge that could heal, could harm. And the power to influence a man's body or will, as in our legend, was seen as the work of black magic and a pact with the devil. The accusation did not end in disgrace. It ended in a trial, often with torture to obtain a confession. And the sentence, for a crime as grave as poisoning, real or imagined, was almost always death at the stake. A public spectacle to serve as a warning to other women. This is the context that gives a terrible vertigo to the legend. The practice, had it existed, was an act of balance over an abyss. It offered a form of domestic control, but at an extreme risk, total annihilation. It was the ultimate high-stakes game. Perhaps that is why the story is told as a local legend, they say that, and not as a documented fact. Perhaps because if something like that happened, it was in the most absolute and understandable secrecy. A secret that, if broken, took lives with it. With this panorama, it is easy to understand why a story like this, real or not, sank so deep into the popular imagination. It encapsulates the fear, the hidden power, the silent struggle in households, and the dangerous edge on which those who possessed knowledge outside the control of the authorities lived. The pyre eventually went out. The laws changed. But the stories, those, never die. What remains of all this today? Was the city of women who poisoned breakfast real? Concrete historical evidence tells us no. We have no records, no trials, no reliable chronicles that confirm it. It is, almost certainly, a medieval urban legend. But like any good legend, its value lies not in its literal truth, but in what it reflects. It is a crystal that distorts, but through which we can see the anxieties and realities of its time, the fear of poisoning, the perception of feminine knowledge as something mysterious and potentially dangerous, and the complex dynamics of power within the walls of the home. This story reaches us as a whisper through the centuries. A fascinating what if? A reminder that history is not only written by kings and battles, but also by domestic secrets, kitchen remedies, and the silent strategies of those who had to make their way in a world with very strict rules. Next time you think of the Middle Ages, don't think only of castles and knights. Think also of those smoky kitchens, of shelves full of jars with herbs, and of the countless stories that were never written down, but were told from generation to generation, until they became legends like this one, as unsettling as they are impossible to forget.